Good morning to you all. Today we'll be talking about anxiety disorders. So, the age-old distinction between psychosis and neurosis in psychiatry, you already know. The term neurosis was coined by William Cullen. Okay, so neurosis includes all the neurotic disorders and with special emphasis on anxiety disorders and depression. So these anxiety disorders, see, almost all of us would have experienced anxiety. But until unless they are beyond a point wherein there is impairment in social, occupational, and family functioning, we do not call it as a disorder. In many situations, we experience anxiety, right? So anxiety is actually a learned response, right? We know that we have reacted or we have seen someone reacting in a particular way at a particular situation, and then we start reacting in the same way to that particular situation. For example, there are certain situations wherein if your parents or if your close ones react in a particular way, when we were kids, we watched them react in that particular way. And if they were anxious in that particular situation, the same thing we'll be learning. That we learn from others. Also, there was this experiment which was done by John Watson. Watson was the father of behavior. So Watson, what am I supposed to do now? Someone has raised a hand. Any doubt? Okay, then. So little Albert was a boy. On him, John Watson produced an animal phobia by making a loud clanging noise while the boy was playing with a rat. So whenever the boy was playing with the rat, he made a loud noise, and then the boy Albert then gradually he developed phobia towards animals because of the startle response which was created by the loud noise which was produced while he was playing with an animal. So like that, we had traumatic learning situations when we were kids or in the past, and those situations influence the behavior throughout the life. So the startle response which he experienced while he was playing with an animal, the boy thought it to be because of that animal. But actually that was not because of the animal, but that because of the noise which was produced concomitantly. So there was this operant conditioning, and the fear on that noise was gradually diverted towards this particular animal, towards the rat first, and then that it got generalized to the other animals. This is how it happens in case of anxiety disorders. So in generally, if you take anxiety disorders as a group, these are the most common psychiatric disorders. And anxiety disorders, there are more common in females than in males. And in female, there is around 30% lifetime prevalence. So basic theories behind this anxiety disorders is that according to behavioral theory, anxiety is a conditioned response to a specific environmental stimulus. As I already said, there was this stimulus which elicited a response, and because that response was unpleasant, that response has been stored, and that response will be elicited in coming future whenever the patient or the person is presented to that same environment or same stimulus. And psychoanalytic theory by Freud states that anxiety is a signal of presence of danger in the unconscious. So if we take the types of anxiety disorders, you have generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, agoraphobia, simple or specific phobias, and social phobias, which come under anxiety disorders. Previously, post-traumatic stress disorder was also included in anxiety disorders, and obsessive compulsive disorder was also included in anxiety disorders. But now these two have been moved to separate section. So in this class, we'll be talking about generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder in detail. And because PTSD and panic disorder were 4-mark questions, and I don't think we'll get any 4-mark questions or essay answers from agoraphobia, specific phobias, or social phobias. So agoraphobia is basically a short, just a briefing about this. Agoraphobia is fear of open spaces or places wherein the person cannot escape. You know, someone is moving a huge crowd, so we cannot escape from that particular crowd. Or someone is at a hilltop or in a very big open space, the patient will have the feeling that he cannot escape from that particular situation, and so that results in anxiety. That is agoraphobia. We have simple or specific phobias where we have lots of phobias, right? We have phobia for this lizard. You have there is a list of named phobias: arachnophobia, this phobia, zoonophobia, like that. So these are directed towards a particular object or a particular situation. And social phobia, most of us will have this social phobia, wherein it is very difficult for some people to talk in public or to talk to people or make a conversation or be in a relationship. So the social phobia is especially seen with social phobia is important because it affects relationships and also affects the occupational performance of that particular person. Okay, then you have this post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes, if you take anxiety disorders in general, there are certain general medical conditions wherein you have to differentiate these anxiety disorders from those general medical conditions. In general, you have to always, someone presents with symptoms of anxiety or whatever, any symptoms of anxiety disorder, you have to rule out all these other general medical conditions, especially arrhythmias, cardiac arrhythmias, because the somatic symptoms of anxiety, uh, they are similar to these symptoms which we experience in these particular disorders. For example, cardiac arrhythmias, you have ischemic heart disease, which is characterized by sweating, palpitations, pain in the chest. The same things may also occur in panic disorder. Then you have mitral valve prolapse and cardiac failure. In asthma, there is a sense of breathlessness. COPD, hyperventilation syndrome, you have pulmonary embolism, hypoxias. In neurological disorders, you have temporal lobe epilepsy and vestibular nerve disease. And especially you have to keep in mind always hyperthyroidism, hypoparathyroidism, hypoglycemia, and pheochromocytoma. Then anemia, because you have palpitations, you have breathlessness, you have dizziness and all. So these things have to be kept in mind. And coming to comorbidity, each anxiety disorder can be coexistent with other anxiety disorders also. Like someone panic disorder with agoraphobia, panic disorder without agoraphobia, generalized anxiety disorder over which we have panic attacks, or there is history of, or maybe there might be concomitant depression, or there might be concomitant depression and generalized anxiety disorder, anxiety and depression. So all these things can be seen as a comorbidity. In addition to that, you have substance abuse disorders, anxiety disorders with substance abuse, or substance use disorders with anxiety. So you have to always rule out, if someone presents with one anxiety disorder, you have to always think about other, and you have to look for whether there are any comorbid other anxiety disorders or depression or substance use disorders in any person with one with symptoms of anxiety disorder. And sometimes psychotic symptoms may also be present in patients with this anxiety disorder. In schizophrenia, someone has a delusion or an anxiety or a delusion or a hallucination, he initially presents with symptoms of anxiety. Because someone hearing voices for the first time, the patient will be so anxious, so he'll be presenting with all the symptoms of anxiety. But unless and until you take a detailed history, you don't know that this anxiety is secondary to hallucination or delusion. So, any symptoms of anxiety, you always should look for other psychiatric disorders as a comorbidity or as a cause of this anxiety. Okay. Now, and course also, these almost all the anxiety disorders, they'll have a chronic course, and prognosis is a bit poor without medication. So again, the rule of 1/3, 30% or 1/3 holds good in psychiatry, wherein 1/3 will have good remission, 1/3 will have a poor, moderate level of functioning, and 1/3 will be a poor responders. So, if at all you have other questions also, I mean other something, if you get a question of specific phobias or social anxiety disorder or social phobia, you can always write them as course and prognosis can be similar to almost all anxiety disorders. Differential diagnosis is similar. Comorbidities are similar. Etiology is also similar. Okay, so yeah, because though I haven't covered those disorders, you can actually finally write a 4-mark question from the other anxiety disorders as far as the exam is concerned. So coming to panic disorder. So you have panic disorder is characterized by panic attacks. But remember, panic attacks can occur in any type of anxiety disorders. Panic attack is not specific to panic disorder. So a panic attack is characterized by a period of intense fear along with a constellation of symptoms. These symptoms rapidly, they reach a peak in about 10 minutes and they'll subside within 20 to 30 minutes. These attacks may be either spontaneous or situational. So these are the symptoms of panic attacks. And panic disorder is characterized by recurrent panic attacks, which are not again secondary to substance use or other medical conditions or any other psychiatric disorder. And there should be a persistent worry or apprehension about having another attack. So one attack, okay, that can be part of any other anxiety disorder. The person will have a constant fear of having that attack again. Then that only then you can label it to be a panic disorder. Otherwise, you see generalized anxiety disorder with panic attacks, agoraphobia with panic attacks. But to be a panic disorder, there should be recurrent panic attacks along with a fear that he may have another attack. So, what are all the symptoms of a panic attack? We have the person experiences, say these are of autonomic hyperactivity, sympathetic hyperactivity. So there is heart rate increases. Yes, so the person experiences palpitations and they'll be sweating, trembling, with sensation of shortness of breath and feeling of choking, chest pain, nausea, abdominal distress, dizziness, derealization, fear of death, numbness and tingling sensations, and chills or hot flashes. And if you see palpitations, sweating, then shortness of breath, chest pain, these can be seen in angina, you have myocardial infarction. And so most of them, these panic attack, these patients usually present with, if at all, because it reaches to the peak in 10 minutes, they may present to the emergency. So in emergency, you have to rule out other general medical causes. Only then you have to diagnose case of panic attack. Then, so for panic attacks, the lifetime prevalence is around 10%, and for panic disorder, it's around 3%. Okay, females, as for all the general anxiety disorders, mostly females are 2 to 3 times at more risk than males, and it has a bimodal distribution around 15 to 24 years and 45 to 54 years. So, comorbidity, there might be other anxiety disorders coexisting with panic disorder, and you have to, for differential diagnosis, you have to rule out the other general medical conditions. So, coming to etiology, there is overactive fear network in the brain in case of panic disorder. And if you take neurotransmitter profile, there is exaggerated postsynaptic receptor response to serotonin. There is increased adrenergic activity, and this is responsible for all the symptoms of panic disorder. And there is reduced GABA sensitivity, so which further causes an increase in, because the GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, reduced inhibitory neurotransmitter tone, which causes excitation. So as a result, there is increased adrenergic activity, which is responsible for all the symptoms. So coming to cognitive theory, it states that there is a heightened sensitivity to internal autonomic cues. So a person had an experience of a panic attack. So he might have, the panic attack might have started with, maybe the person is exposed to a particular situation again. Okay, so then because there is an external cue, then there will be a little or amount of fear which will be starting that particular person. Then there is a bit of so the patient starts worrying. So there'll be little bit of apprehension. There might be palpitations or sweating. So for that small palpitations or maybe heart rate going from 70 to 75 or 80, there will be increased. The person has an increased sensitivity to the internal autonomic cues. So which results in further as well he starts worrying again. Oh, my heart rate has started increasing. So maybe, okay, then I may get breathlessness. There might be feelings of choking. There might be, maybe I may die because of this particular attack. And that will be a vicious cycle on and on and on, resulting in a panic attack. So these are normal situations or normal responses to that particular situations, but there is heightened sensitivity to that particular cues, resulting in a panic attack, in the precipitation of a panic attack. So we have etiology, epidemiology, and then the clinical features. Now coming to management. So management, there are two aspects. You have to manage the particular panic attack and you have to manage the panic disorder. So someone with these constellation of symptoms have come to emergency department. First, rule out all the other general medical conditions which are possible, which might be possible according to the presentation. And if all these are excluded and you label them as okay, panic attack, then you have to, or manage that particular panic attack. Or if the anxiety is so intense, you may start on an intravenous benzodiazepines for that acute management, or sublingual benzodiazepines also can be given. If you have clonazepam, we have a sublingual formulation wherein you keep under the tongue and it gets absorbed in sublingual buccal mucosa, and then there is immediate uh, relief of symptoms. Alternatively, you can also go for intravenous or intramuscular benzodiazepines. Then you have treated the particular panic attack. Then you have to manage the panic disorder. So again, almost the drugs which are available are antidepressants. So you have SSRIs, SNRIs, tricyclics, and then benzodiazepines are of very helpful use in uh, panic disorder or any anxiety disorders because of the immediate action and uh, prompt recovery of all the symptoms, because these benzodiazepines they calm the patient. So these are of very helpful use. These are very helpful in case of panic disorder or in any other anxiety disorders. So in SSRIs, again you have escitalopram, you have citalopram, paroxetine, you have SNRIs like venlafaxine, desvenlafaxine, tricyclics, amitriptyline, imipramine, or triptyline, anything can be used. But again, based on the profile of the patients, based on the other comorbid drugs, which is comorbid conditions of the patients, based on the drugs which is using, we assess the drug interactions and possible effects on that particular person, and then we will choose the antidepressant accordingly. Benzodiazepines, they can be also given for an suppose someone has a panic disorder. Okay, you can give sublingual benzodiazepines. They can be prescribed which can be used at the start of further panic attacks. So sublingual clonazepam, he can use it, and whenever he feels that he may have an attack, these benzodiazepines can be used. Then you have cognitive behavior therapy. This is pharmacotherapy. In cognitive behavior therapy, first thing, the person has to understand that what is anxiety, what are all the bodily responses, how a body reacts when someone experiences anxiety. So there are certain somatic symptoms or somatic uh, responses when a person is anxious, and we have also the psychic responses. So because of the heightened perception to the bodily responses of anxiety, one fears about landing into a panic disorder, panic attack, or one fears that he may lose his life uh, based for this panic attack, and that is actually responsible for precipitation of an attack. So we teach what are all the responses of a body in case of anxiety, and we'll try to reassure them that these responses are these things which he is experiencing are normal responses, and the person is not going to die because of these responses. And once the anxiety comes down, these he will not experience any of this. And also that these are not any part of any other deadly or general medical condition. And because again anxiety is a state of apprehension, so you have to teach relaxation techniques and exposure again because if at all a person has an anxiety in a particular situation, so these panic attacks can again be out of the blue or they can be situational. So the person has panic attacks in a particular situation, we try to expose the person to this particular situation, and then because see, after a prolonged exposure anxiety comes down, but the person, because of the fear, he will not expose himself to that particular situation. He will be trying to avoid that particular situation. So, in prolonged exposure, and that should be a graded exposure. Again, you will construct a hierarchy uh, of the anxiety-provoking situations. We'll start from the least anxiety-provoking situations. We expose a person till at a stage one. We'll expose a person to a particular situation, and the person will not have anxiety after some time. Then we'll go to a stage 2 wherein the situation is much more anxiety provoking. So finally at last stage would be the actual situation wherein he had panic attacks, and after prolonged exposure the person anxiety comes down and the person will be able to handle that particular situation at a later date even if he is exposed to without any panic attack. So relaxation techniques, you have systematic relaxation, you have Jacobson's progressive muscle relaxation, wherein we say relaxation techniques there are off-label or you have specific psychological relaxation techniques. In specific relaxation techniques in psychology, you have Jacobson's progressive muscle relaxation, wherein we'll ask the patient to lie down in a relaxed position, and then we'll ask the patient to gradually contract one group of muscle. For example, which can be progressed from top to bottom or bottom to top, I mean, craniocaudal or caudocranial fashion. For example, as a person, so in each muscle, we'll try to contract a particular muscle, and that contraction will cause a certain amount of tension in that particular muscle and the body. And after relaxation, the person will experience the difference between contraction and relaxation, and then because of the once the muscle is relaxed, and that relaxation will cause a sense of ease, and that will be continued. So for example, we'll ask the person to frown, so there will be contraction of the muscles of the forehead, then we'll ask the person to let down to just relax the muscle. Then there will be experience of contraction and relaxation, and once we experience relaxation, we'll understand, the person understands that okay, relaxation is far better, and once each and every muscle of the body is contracted and relaxed, and finally he'll be in a state of entire relaxation, complete state of relaxation. And on the after once the Jacobson's progressive muscle relaxation is complete, then there will be graded exposure, and once relaxation is achieved, then we'll go for systematic desensitization or exposure, and then to the particular situation. And once the patient is relaxed completely, even the anxiety provoking situation is exposed, he will not have that amount of anxiety. This is the basis of relaxation techniques and systematic desensitization. Now coming to the second one, generalized anxiety disorder. So generalized anxiety disorder, as the name suggests, is generalized. There won't be any cause. It's an excessive worry. It's free floating. It's a continuous persistent anxiety. And apprehension is about everyday events. So there is no specific event which causes anxiety. Every event causes anxiety. Every problem causes anxiety. And even there is no problem, there is anxiety. Patient is happy, even still he is anxious that his happiness may not last long. He's sad, he will be anxious that the sadness will last forever. So irrespective of the situation, irrespective of everything, the patient will be anxious 24 hours, 367 days for everything in his life. In addition to that, there are symptoms of muscle tension. Like you have tension, headaches. You have the person may have a high migraine. There will be pain in the neck, generalized body pains because of muscle tension. So finally, there is distress and functional impairment. Someone is anxious, he cannot go and work. He cannot go and talk. So generalized anxiety disorder is something like free floating anxiety, apprehension, excessive worry. So etiology, so clear. So psychological theories they suggest that there is diminished sense of control. So for most of the anxiety disorders, it is the mother or the principal caretaker in the infant relationship, which is so important for any psychopathology, especially anxiety disorders. Any insecure attachments to the motherly figure will or the primary caregivers will actually cause intolerance or uncertainty. And later on, those persons are at increased risk to develop these anxiety disorders. Someone's mother who's not so attentive, someone's mother is not available to that particular baby at the time or she needs, or someone's mother is so cold that she does not attend to the baby or she does not provide the emotional support. So there's a sense of uncertainty whether the mother reacts or not, whether the mother stays with me or not, whether the mother will give the anticipated emotional support or not. And because of that uncertainty, there's a bit of anxiety which will be continuing throughout his life. So keep in mind, be cautious with your babies, be happy with your babies if you have, I mean, at later date. So in parenting, an overprotective mother or I mean overprotective parenting or parenting where there is no warmth. So finally there is low perceived controls. There is poor events. And then stressful life events continuously one after the other. They also predispose to anxiety. And coming to neuroanatomical models or biological models of these anxiety disorders, there has not been much human studies. Only studies were done on animals about uh, the biological basis of anxiety disorders. So the consequences are far better known than the actual causes. For example, we say there is a overactive or hyperactive noradrenergic network which is responsible for all these symptoms, something like someone anxious, palpitations, fatigue are all because of hyperactive noradrenergic network, or maybe hyperactive increased secretion of norepinephrine in locus coeruleus, or you have fear networks of amygdala, hippocampus, periaqueductal gay matter, and anterior cingulate gyrus. All these fear network there might be overactive. So which is generalized to almost all the anxiety disorders. But the actual trials have not been done on humans, and these are based on data based on experiments which are conducted on animals. And again, because you have increased norepinephrine, you have increased activation of hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So increased levels of cortisol, you have increased levels of stress. So all these are only the consequences of an anxiety or the physiological state of a person in anxiety, but the actual causes they're actually not known. Okay, so coming to epidemiology, the lifetime prevalence is around 6%, and females, as all for all the anxiety disorders, females have more chance of developing anxiety disorders than males, and around 40 to 60 years ages. I mean, this anxiety GAG is present in all the ages, but patients with 45 to 60 years, they are at a bit higher risk compared to the other age groups. Coming to some clinical features, so almost same like panic attack, but not though that severe, because these symptoms are present 24/7, 365 days, so they will not be about of that intensity. But someone has a generalized anxiety disorder, he can also have a panic attack. So again, symptoms of autonomic arousal, like hyperenergic symptoms like palpitations, you have sweating, trembling, a dry mouth, or shaking. Then you have physical symptoms like difficulty in breathing, choking, chest pain, nausea, or abdominal distress. And mental state symptoms, feeling dizzy, unsteadiness, fainting, lightheadedness, fear of losing control. The other symptoms like hot flushes, cold chills, numbness, or tingling. And symptoms of muscle tension like aches and pains, restlessness, inability to relax, feeling keyed up, feeling on the edge, or being mentally tense. So almost if you just look into this, these are all almost similar to that seen in panic attack. But panic attack, they start very rapidly, they reach to a peak very rapidly, and they last for around 20 to 30 minutes. But in case of generalized anxiety disorder, these are constantly present and they are not of that intensity. So coming to management, again you have the same drugs which are used for anxiety disorders. You have for same, you have antidepressants, you have benzodiazepines. But based on the specific some symptoms per symptom profile, you the amount of or the type of drug which you use depends. For the psychic symptoms of anxiety, buspirone is a drug which is mostly used. For somatic symptoms, you use benzodiazepine. If at all depressive symptoms are present, the person can prescribe antidepressants. For autonomic symptoms, beta blockers can be used. Propranolol is so very effective in treating these symptoms of palpitations, tachycardia, trembling, and all. And especially this propranolol can also be used in cases of social phobia. When someone has phobia to talk, or a social anxiety disorder to talk in a particular situation, or he has a meeting, he has to perform well in that meeting, and he has anxiety. For that, you can use propranolol, which can be given around 1 hour before the treatment, before the anticipated lecture or a conversation. So after 1 hour, his autonomic symptoms of palpitations, tachycardia, they come down, and the person will be able to perform better. These can so for antidepressants, so though they say buspirone is the first line or is a drug of choice for generalized anxiety disorder, mostly in practice we actually start them on SSRIs, on antidepressants, because antidepressants will also reduce anxiety based on the serotonin model of anxiety. So antidepressants can be used for generalized anxiety disorders. And again, you have this first line based on the profile of the patient, you choose the antidepressants. So you can use SSRIs or SNRIs. And in psychotherapy, you have cognitive behavior therapy and behavioral therapies, like you have for relaxation techniques. The person can be taught relaxation techniques and cognitive, that he'll be having certain cognitive distortions, and CBT addresses those cognitive distortions. But psychotherapy is less effective because we don't know the cause of anxiety, and irrespective of the external situation, person is continuously anxious without any cause. So if we know a cause, we try to address that particular cause. Because there is no specific cause, so we cannot address any particular issue. So psychotherapy is less effective in case of generalized anxiety disorder. So again, for all anxiety disorder, the cause is chronic, prognosis is poor without treatment. So remission rate is only 30% on treatment. Remember, the person will be better only on treatment. Once he stops his medication, again, all the symptoms of anxiety start together. So once a person starts his treatment for generalized anxiety disorder, he has to continue for almost lifelong. Because once he stops, he'll get all those symptoms. And these symptoms of anxiety, they are so they cannot be tolerated that much because there is a sense of apprehension, there is a sense of unease all the time, and so the person cannot concentrate on anything, he cannot perform anything. So it is imperative that he uses his medicines. And coming to post-traumatic stress disorder, this is the last one for today. So post-traumatic stress disorder, so there is a trauma, and after the trauma, the person has experienced this stress. So you call it as a post-traumatic stress disorder. So trauma is not something, it's a small trauma. The person should have met with an traumatic experience of very high intensity, something like a flood. There was tsunami. That was a very big traumatic experience, or floods, flash floods, or there might be an earthquake, or they should, or maybe a car accident of so much intensity, or uh, there might be a sexual assault. All these are intense traumatic experiences. And the person, after experiencing trauma, there is severe psychological disturbance characterized by involuntary re-experiencing of elements of the event. So he'll be experiencing and re-experiences the event, the symptoms of hyperarousal, and he will avoid those situations and emotional numbing. Okay. PTSD is a 4-mark question for you. So coming to clinical features, there are persistent symptoms of increased psychological sensitivity and arousal. So the person will be always on the edge. He'll be always aroused. As a result, it is difficult for him to fall or stay asleep. He'll have bursts of irritability or bursts of anger. Person may have self-destructive behavior. There are difficulties in concentration. This hypervigilance, because there'll be fear that he might have those because he'll be re-experiencing those symptoms, or he'll be experiencing that particular event over and over again. He'll be more vigilant and more cautious so as to try to save himself. And because of that, there is an exaggerated startle response. So then he'll be remembering, persistent remembering of the stressor. So there will be intrusive flashbacks. All of a sudden, there will be flashback of what has happened. There might be vivid memories or recurring dreams. And if at all he is exposed to that circumstances resembling or associated with stressor, he'll be experiencing all these symptoms again and again and again. So he'll actually prefer to avoid those particular circumstances. He'll not go back to those situations or circumstances again. And there's an inability to recall either partially or completely some important aspects of the period of exposure to that particular stressor. For example, someone has experienced a severe car accident and he somehow, or a very dreadful accident, and somehow he has survived, and maybe he might have lost his family members also, but he has survived. So he'll be having those uh, he'll be remembering those events over and over and again. All of a sudden he'll have the images or the events that have occurred, he'll start remembering, or he may have flashbacks, or he may have the steps of accident or whatever has happened in his dreams. And so he'll start avoiding those circumstances, wherein he'll stop avoiding. He'll say, I will not get into a car. No, I will not travel by road. I will take a train, or I will not travel. Okay, then, and further, there is again increased psychological sensitivity and arousal. So, and if we ask the person who is so stressed out after this particular event, he will be unable to recall certain, either partially or completely, I don't know what has happened. Or there might be breaks in what has actually happened. So these symptoms should arise within 6 months of the event. And they should be present for at least 1 month, and along with that, there should be clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupation, or other important areas of functioning. So, see, if someone is exposed to floods, for example, if you take a flood, so some thousands of people will be exposed, but not all of them will develop a post-traumatic stress disorder. So there are certain factors which are risk factors for a person to develop into PTSD. The vulnerability factors are low education, lower socioeconomic class, females, so presence of low self-esteem or neurotic traits, or family history or previous history of psychiatric illnesses or previous traumatic events. And the trauma, the factors of trauma like severity of trauma, perceived life threat, peri-traumatic emotions, and peri-traumatic dissociation. So, even if in case of floods, maybe there are certain people who might be exposed to who might be either in the way of the water flow, or for a case of a cyclone, there might be at the center of the cyclone, the what do you call the center point of a cyclone. They will be more affected than those who are in far vicinity. So because of the trauma severity is more if the persons are close than if the persons are away from a particular source of trauma. And someone who has a perceived life threat, they'll have more chances of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. The protective factors are high IQ, high social class, male gender, and presence of psychopathic traits. If you take etiology, there are, again, I said, these are consequences rather than etiological theories. There is reduced hippocampal volume. And coming to psychological theories, the person re-experiences symptoms when fear response to a harmless situation is associated with original trauma, maybe because of emotional memories. So there is remodeling of underlying schemas. So, and because to remodel the underlying schemas, those traumatic experiences should be active in the memory until the process is complete. Before the traumatic event, the schemas were different, but now the schemas have to be remodeled according to the traumatic event. So those have to be, for the remodeling, those traumatic experiences should be in active memory. Okay, so because those situations which the person has actually experienced was harmless situation, but because of the particular cyclone or particular flood, that particular situation has become a harmful situation. So because of those memories associated with emotion, the person will start re-experiencing the symptoms. And there is dissociation wherein there is emotional numbing. So there is no overwhelming emotion. So the person thinks without feeling anything, so even after that amount of traumatic experience. So coming to management. For drugs, you have SSRIs. Paroxetine is a drug which can be given for post-traumatic stress disorder. And for sleep disturbance, you can use mirtazapine. If at all the patient has disturbances in sleep, you can use mirtazapine or non-benzodiazepine agonists like zolpidem. To reduce hyperarousal, benzodiazepines or buspirone and any antidepressant can be given. If there are symptoms of psychosis, aggression, the patient can be prescribed antipsychotics. If there is hostility or impulsiveness, the person can be prescribed mood stabilizers. So coming to psychotherapy. So first, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is the treatment modality which has lots of evidence in treating or managing post-traumatic stress disorder, wherein there is an external stimulus which elicits a multi-saccadic eye movements, lateral eye movements, and this is wherein the person is asked to actually recollect the process of the disturbing thoughts of the event, and along with that, an external stimulation is given to produce eye movements, and these somehow the actual mechanism of how this works is actually not known, and when these two can be combined, this helps to process the emotions associated with traumatic experiences, and the experiences of anxiety, they come down. Okay, so what they say is that once you actually concentrate on the external stimulus which is presented along with trying to recollect the traumatic experience, because the working memory is very busy on concentrating on this particular external stimulation, they will not focus on the what has actually happened, and this causes reduction in anxiety. For cognitive CBT, it's again a psychoeducation about PTSD and self-monitoring of symptoms. Again, anxiety management, breathing, all the relaxation stimuli. Psychodynamic psychotherapy, it focuses on resolving any unconscious conflict provoked by stressful events. In stress management, we have to teach them skills to cope with stress such as relaxation, breathing, thought stopping, assertiveness, and positive thinking. So call this eye movement EMDR. Desensitization and reprocessing is a treatment of choice for post-traumatic stress disorder. Along with drugs, again the same drugs you have for anxiety disorders and for depression, drugs are same. But based on the patient's profile and symptomatology, the choice of drug actually differs. So this completes anxiety disorders. So this is because you have to cover 3 or 4 disorders. It's a bigger class compared to the previous classes. But you can expect 2 questions from this particular topic, either PTSD or a panic disorder. So that's it. Any doubts? Someone raised a hand. If no doubt, we'll conclude for today.